What if the best days of your life haven't happened yet? What if joy isn't behind you, but waiting ahead of you? Most people stop dreaming after 40. But what if this is when you were finally meant to bloom? Somewhere after 40. Maybe after the kids grow up, or the job gets tiring, or the mirror starts reflecting back someone you barely recognize. There's a quiet lie that begins to whisper, your best is behind you. You don't even realize when you start believing it. It happens in small ways. You stop making long-term plans. You lower your expectations. You start saying things like, maybe that wasn't meant for me, or that ship has sailed. The world around you isn't much help either. Marketing screams youth. Social media showcases people half your age doing things you once dreamed of. Even movies and books romanticize firsts, first love, first success, first leap. So what happens when you're no longer anyone's first? You start to believe you've become invisible, replaceable, past tense, and maybe you wouldn't say that out loud, but it's in your body. The heaviness, the hesitation, the way your dreams start to gather dust because you no longer believe anyone would care if they came true. But here's the insight, the small shift that has the power to change everything. What if this version of you is the one that's finally ready? Not the younger you, not the polished, perfect one, but this you, the one who's been through heartbreak, who's survived loss, who knows what matters and what doesn't, who's stripped of illusions and full of quiet courage. Because here's what no one tells you. You weren't meant to peak at 25. You weren't meant to figure it all out in your 30s. And your best life isn't hiding in the past. It's waiting in your permission. Your permission to believe again, to try again, to want something more. Not because you're greedy, but because you're still alive. There's a false finish line we build around midlife. We act like turning 40, 50, 60 means we've crossed into maintenance mode. We stop asking big questions. We stop taking brave leaps. We stop choosing wonder over routine. But who decided that? Who said your timeline expired? Who told you that reinvention is reserved for the young? I want to challenge that. I want to offer you something radical. Maybe midlife isn't a slow fade. Maybe it's your second sunrise. Because here's the truth. You've lived enough to be wise, but not too long to be done. You've hurt enough to know real healing. You've failed enough to stop fearing failure. And more than anything, you've seen enough to know that what really matters isn't applause or status. It's peace, purpose, meaning. And what if your best years are the ones where you stop pretending, where you stop performing, where you finally get to be who you really are? Let me ask you this. When was the last time you dreamed without editing yourself? When was the last time you allowed your imagination to reach forward, not backward? Most people think their past holds all the beauty, all the joy, all the possibility. But the past is a place for learning, not living. What you create next could be the most beautiful thing you've ever done. Not because it's the biggest, not because it's the most impressive, but because it's yours. Because it's born from honesty, not ego. Because it's chosen, not chased. So here's the insight I want to leave you with as we move into the next part. You are not behind. You are becoming. And the years ahead, they're not leftovers. They're not shadows. They're not what's left of your life. They are still your life. And they might be the best part of it yet. Let me tell you about Arthur. Arthur was 62 when he sat in the back of a community college classroom, surrounded by people half his age. His hands were shaking slightly as he held a pencil, not a laptop, not a tablet, just a pencil, and a stack of lined paper. It was his first time back in a classroom in over 40 years. He'd retired from a long career in logistics, spreadsheets, deadlines, fluorescent lights. A reliable job, yes, but never the life he wanted. What he really wanted, quietly tucked away for decades, was to write. He had notebooks at home filled with ideas, unpublished, unseen. He'd scribble short stories late at night when no one was looking. He'd stop at gas stations and jot down dialogues from strangers. He had whole fictional towns built in his mind. But for most of his life, Arthur believed that dream belonged to someone else, someone younger, braver, more valid. Until his wife passed. Her loss cracked something wide open. He realized he didn't want to die with stories still inside him. So, one Monday morning, he signed up for a writing class. He walked into that classroom with nothing but courage and a pencil. At first, he felt out of place. The professor talked fast. The students wrote on glowing screens. They referenced writers he'd never heard of. He thought about quitting almost every week, but he didn't. Instead, he kept writing. Every night, he read more. He listened. He shared his stories, even when his voice trembled. By the end of the semester, one of his short stories had been picked up by a small literary magazine. By the next year, he was teaching a local workshop for adults over 50 called Write Like It's Not Too Late. And by 66, Arthur published his first book. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was real. It was his. He said in an interview later, "I thought my best years were the ones where I made money or climbed a ladder, but the best year of my life? It was the year I finally said yes to the thing I was afraid of." Arthur's story isn't about writing. It's about returning. Returning to the parts of ourselves we've shelved. Returning to the callings we ignored because we thought we missed our window. It's about realizing that sometimes life gives you a second chance, and it's disguised as a quiet whisper in your heart saying, "It's still possible." Arthur wasn't extraordinary. He was ordinary. And that's the beauty. He was one of us, tired, unsure, a little bruised by time, but brave. Brave enough to believe that just because the world stopped expecting something of him, didn't mean he had to stop expecting more from himself. That's what this story is about. Not ambition, but becoming. Becoming the kind of person who doesn't measure life by age, who doesn't believe the lie that dreams come with expiration dates, who knows that sometimes the story doesn't even begin until you think it's almost over. So if you're sitting there wondering if it's too late, let Arthur remind you, it's not. And maybe, just maybe, your pen is still full of chapters that no one's read yet, including you. Arthur's story isn't just inspiring, it's instructive. Because the biggest lesson in his quiet courage is this: it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. We say that phrase often. We hang it on wall art and put it in greeting cards. But when you see someone live it, at 62, at 66, or even at 76, it stops being a cliché. It becomes a mirror. What dream have you shelved? What part of yourself have you buried under responsibilities, routines, and reasons? Arthur teaches us that it's not time that decides our best years. It's permission. Permission to pick the pen back up. To walk into rooms where you feel out of place. To start again even when no one is watching. It's easy to think our worth is tied to results. That we need recognition, money, or an audience to justify the pursuit of something meaningful. But Arthur's joy didn't come from book sales. It came from showing up to write, even when he was terrified. That's what makes the best years best. Not applause, not perfection, not speed, but alignment. Living in alignment with what matters to you. And guess what? At midlife, you're finally old enough to know what that is. You've lived enough to separate noise from truth. You've failed enough to know which risks are worth taking. You've grieved enough to know joy is fragile and sacred and worth chasing. So if there's something inside you that still burns quietly, don't ignore it. If there's a passion that's whispered your name for decades, listen again. If there's a version of you that feels distant, but not gone, go find them. Your best years aren't defined by youth. They're defined by you. By the day you choose courage over comfort. By the moment you stop saying, "I used to," and start saying, "I still can." by the simple, sacred act of showing up for what makes you feel alive. Arthur didn't need to become a bestseller to validate his story. He just needed to believe that it was still worth writing. And so do you. You don't need to become famous, or rich, or wildly accomplished. You just need to remember that you still matter. That your voice still has something to say. That the second half of life can be just as vibrant as the first, if you stop assuming it's over. Here's the truth that society won't shout, but wisdom will whisper. We don't peak. We pivot. We grow. We evolve. We shed. We awaken. And sometimes, the version of ourselves that steps forward after 40 isn't a watered-down version of who we were. It's a concentrated essence of who we really are. So let this part of your life be bold. Let it be different. Let it be honest. And let it be enough. Because your best years might not just be ahead. They might begin now. If you had asked me 10 years ago whether the best years of my life were behind me, I probably would have nodded yes. Not because I had given up, but because the world had taught me to measure life in milestones, degrees, promotions, weddings, babies, home ownership. By that standard, I'd hit most of the major ones by my late 30s. And yet, something felt unfinished. Not in the sense that I hadn't done enough, but in the sense that I hadn't quite become who I wanted to be. See, the problem isn't aging, it's how we talk about it. We treat youth like a spotlight and everything after 40 like a slow fade into the background. But life doesn't dim, unless we let it. I remember sitting on my porch one evening, tea in hand, watching the light shift through the trees. And it hit me, not like a lightning bolt, but like a quiet realization. I'm not done. I'm not done becoming. I'm not done dreaming. And I'm certainly not done living with a heart wide open. It was a moment of rebellion, not against time, but against the narrative that time had passed me. And maybe you've felt it too. That quiet ache. That, is this all there is? Silence. That strange pause in your soul when you wonder if you've already seen your best days. But I want you to know something. That feeling isn't failure. It's invitation. It's life knocking softly and saying, what else do you want to experience? For me, it looked like writing again. Not for an audience, not for applause, but for the feeling of aligning with my own voice. It looked like taking longer walks without my phone. It looked like calling people just to say thank you. It looked like saying no to what drained me, and yes to what gave me light. And little by little, I realized, my best years weren't measured by scale or success. They were measured by connection. Connection to myself, to others, to this moment. I started noticing things I used to miss. The way sunlight falls through blinds, the sound of my own breath in the early morning, the richness of silence when it's chosen, not forced. And in that attention, I found something precious. A version of myself I didn't know I was still allowed to be. One that is soft, but strong. Wiser, but still curious. More grateful than ever. So if you're in that space of wondering, doubting, wishing something would change, maybe you don't need a massive shift. Maybe you just need a return. A return to wonder, to voice, to self. Because no matter your age, your story isn't done. There are still people you haven't met, books you haven't read, places you haven't seen, and parts of yourself you haven't fully lived into. And that's not scary. That's sacred. So don't let anyone convince you you're too late. Don't let a number become a limit. Don't let the best of you collect dust in memories you still have now. And now is more than enough. Here's what I know now that I didn't know at 25. The best years of your life are not always the loudest, the fastest, or the most celebrated. Sometimes they're the quiet ones, the years when you finally feel at home in your own skin. Sometimes they're the years when no one is watching, but you're finally paying attention. We've been sold a version of happiness that's always chasing something more money, more success, more youth. But what if the best years are the ones where you finally stop chasing and start choosing? Choosing to rest, choosing to try, choosing to forgive yourself for not doing it sooner. Maybe your best years are not the ones where everything went right. Maybe they're the ones when everything went wrong, and you still found something worth waking up for. Because real life isn't a highlight reel. It's a collection of moments: burnt toast, deep conversations, belly laughter, long walks, and the realization that this simple, sacred moment is enough. So what if instead of asking, "Did I peak already?" you asked, "What if I'm just now stepping into the part of life where I know how to love better, rest deeper, give more freely, and want less desperately?" Because that's not decline. That's wisdom. And wisdom ages well. The truth is, we all carry some regrets. Things we wish we'd done earlier. People we wish we hadn't lost. Versions of ourselves we wish we'd honored more. But the beautiful part? You're still here. You can still choose. You can still begin again. You get to decide that these years, however many you have left, will not be lived in fear of too late, but in honor of still possible. And that shift? That's where your second bloom begins. It doesn't require reinvention, just re-engagement. Not reinvention of who you are, but reconnection to who you've always been beneath all the noise. So take a breath, look around, and remember, this isn't the end. It's the beginning of a version of your life that's more grounded, more meaningful, more real than you ever thought possible. What if the best version of you is the one you haven't met yet? Not because you aren't good enough now, but because you're still becoming. Share in the comments, what's something you've always wanted to do? That maybe it's time to begin now? And if this video spoke to something in you, subscribe. Not because of the algorithm, but because this space is for people like us. Late bloomers, quiet rebuilders, still believers. Welcome to the Wisdom series. You belong here.